What if, on the night Peter Green took LSD at that Munich commune in 1970, he had simply walked out the door and gone home? Well, we will never know because that didn't happen. Here's his story.
Now, baby, you were sweet as you can be. Everything you do,
Peter Green was born Peter Allen Greenbaum on October 29th, 1946 in Bethnal Green, East London. He grew up in a working-class Jewish family in one of the most anonymous parts of the city, a place with no particular claim on rock and roll history. Nobody looked at Bethnal Green in the early 1960s and saw a hotbed of musical talent. But Peter Green was already different. He picked up the guitar as a teenager, and something happened that is difficult to explain and impossible to manufacture. He felt it, not technique and not theory. He understood the emotional language of the blues, transmitted directly from the American recordings of B.B. King, Freddie King, and Elmore James. By the time he was 19, he was good enough to step into one of the most demanding roles in British rock, replacing Eric Clapton in John Mayall's Blues Breakers. Let that land for a moment. Clapton had left Mayall's band, wreathed in a kind of mystique that bordered on mythology. Somebody had spray-painted Clapton as God on a wall in North London. The man chosen to follow him was a 20-year-old from Bethnal Green who had barely recorded anything. And yet, within months, Clapton himself admitted that Green was the better player. Not equal, better. John Mayall said the same thing. The word spread through the small, intensely competitive world of British blues. There was something happening in Peter Green that went beyond skill.
I need some lips to feel next to mine.
But playing in someone else's band was never going to hold him. In 1967, Green left the Blues Breakers and formed Fleetwood Mac, alongside drummer Mick Fleetwood, bassist John McVie, and guitarist Jeremy Spencer. The name came from the rhythm section, not from their frontman. That was a deliberate signal. Green wasn't building a vehicle for his own ego. He was building something that could outlast any one person.
I love that little girl so good. She make my low down for the come.
Here's something that surprises us every time we check our analytics. More than 90% of the people watching this video right now are not subscribed. 90%. Stories like this deserve to be heard. That's why this needs to reach further. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, share this with one person who should hear this story. Now let's continue. What followed was one of the most concentrated bursts of creative output in British rock history. Between 1967 and 1970, Fleetwood Mac released a run of albums and singles that redefined what a British blues band could do. Black Magic Woman, later made famous by Santana, was a Green original. Albatross, an instrumental so spacious and unhurried that it barely seemed to belong to pop music at all, reached #1 in the UK in 1969. Oh Well, released the same year, was a two-part composition that moved from hard blues stomp to classical guitar meditation within the span of a single track. None of it sounded like anything else. All of it sounded like Peter Green. The guitar tone was the thing. He played a 1959 Gibson Les Paul Standard, but somewhere in its history, previous owner had reinstalled the neck pickup backwards, reversing the polarity. When Green combined it with the bridge pickup, the result was a sound unlike anything else in existence. A slightly out-of-phase, hollow vocal quality that players and engineers spent decades trying to understand and recreate. It was an accident of manufacturing that became an accident of genius. The instrument had found its player. By 1969, Fleetwood Mac were headlining concerts across Europe and America. Peter Green was 22 years old and widely considered one of the 3 or 4 greatest guitarists in the world. He was not, however, comfortable with what that meant. Success unsettled him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. He began giving his royalties to charity. He told journalists he didn't believe rock musicians should earn more money than doctors or nurses. He started questioning whether the whole enterprise of a famous rock band was worth the cost. The breaking point came in early 1970. At a commune in Munich, at a party thrown by a group connected to the emerging drug culture of European counterculture, Green took LSD. What happened inside his mind that night was never fully described in his own words, but the effects were observable and immediate. He returned to England a changed person. The certainty was gone. The grounded, almost frightening confidence he had carried into every studio and stage had been replaced by something fractured and restless. He played his last proper concert with Fleetwood Mac in May 1970. He was 23 years old. He left at the peak, not because the music had run out, not because the audience had turned away, but because something inside him had broken loose from its moorings. The rest of the band carried on.
But don't ask me what I think of you. I might not give the answer that you want me to.
The years that followed were painful in the way that only the squandering of extraordinary talent can be. Green attempted solo recordings in the early 1970s, but they were scattered, unfocused, the work of a man who could still play, but no longer knew why he was playing. He drifted in and out of psychiatric care. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia. At one point, he showed up at the offices of his accountant holding a gun, demanding they stop sending him royalty checks. He didn't want the money. He wanted to be left alone. The fingernails became a symbol of the whole collapse. He let them grow for years, long past the point where they could have allowed him to fret a string. It was as though he were barricading himself against the instrument that had defined him, as though the guitar itself had become something threatening. He spent a period living on the streets of London. He worked as a gravedigger. He was in and out of hospital through the late 1970s and 1980s, receiving treatments, including electroconvulsive therapy. Meanwhile, Fleetwood Mac became something almost unrecognizable from what Green had built. After a series of lineup changes, they absorbed two California singer-songwriters named Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. In 1977, the album Rumors sold over 40 million copies. It became one of the best-selling records in history. The band Green founded, the band named after the rhythm section he had chosen, had become one of the most commercially successful groups on the planet, and he was not in it, had not been in it for 7 years, was living in circumstances that made the word fallen sound inadequate. What makes Peter Green's story different from a simple tragedy is that he came back. Not all the way, not with the velocity of what he had been, but back. In the 1990s, he cut his fingernails. He picked up the guitar again. He formed a band called the Peter Green Splinter Group and began touring small venues, playing the blues he had always loved. The voice, and his guitar was still there, weathered, quieter, but unmistakably his. Those who saw him in those years described a man who had made a kind of peace with what remained. His influence had never actually left. Gary Moore, who recorded an entire album of Green's compositions, spoke about him with the reverence usually reserved for the long dead. Kirk Hammett of Metallica tracked down and purchased Green's original reversed pickup Les Paul, paying just under $2 million for it, calling it the most important guitar in rock history. Entire lineages of blues rock players, anyone who valued tone over speed, feeling over technique, carried a thread that ran back to Green's playing. Peter Green died in his sleep on July 25th, 2020, at the age of 73. The tributes came from every corner of the music world. Mick Fleetwood wept openly in interviews. Former bandmates, guitarists half a century younger, critics who had followed his story. For decades, all of them reached for the same words: genius, loss, and something that resisted being fully explained. Because that is the truth of Peter Green. He was not a footnote to Fleetwood Mac's success. He was its origin point. The band that sold 40 million records was built on the foundation he laid, named after the musicians he chose, shaped by the musical values he established. He walked away before anyone could take it from him, whether that was the bravest thing he ever did or the saddest is a question that doesn't have a clean answer. Peter Green built something that outlasted him, outgrew him, and never once forgot where it came from. He didn't chase the fame. He didn't fight to stay. He just played until he couldn't, and then eventually until he could again. If this story moved you, leave a comment and subscribe for more. Whose story do you want to hear next?
I need some lips.
I love that little girl so good. She make my low down for the come.
Don't ask me what I think of you. I might not give the answer that you want me to.